Thanks for joining us on episode 1632 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
Hi, I'm Kurt Uhlir, and I challenge you to invest in yourself, invest in others, develop your influence, and impact the world by using your time, your talent, and your treasures to live out your calling. Having the ability to be a servant leader wherever you are is key. And one way to be inspired to do that is to listen to this, the Inspired Stewardship Podcast with my friend, Scott Mader. And he kind of froze. And he's like, I don't know. And he came back to me literally like a week later and then several times later. And he was like, I've never thought about my decisions impacting my happiness, which was his goal. How like that would affect now versus later. Like he was devoutly committed to his wife, but like he had never thought about it. He's like, if I was just trying to be the most happy as possible.
Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world.
In today's podcast episode, I interview Kurt Uhlir. I ask Kurt about what servant leadership really is, and Kurt also shares what it means to balance being present at home and work as a high performer. And I also ask Kurt to share with you what is one shift you need to make to become a better leader. I have a great book that's been out for a while now called Inspired Living. Assemble the puzzle of your calling by mastering your time, your talent, and your treasures. You can find out more about that book over at inspiredlivingbook.com. It'll take you to a page where there's information and you can sign up to get some mailings about it as well as purchase a copy there. I'd love to see you get a copy and share with me how it impacted your world. Kurt Uhlir is known as the king of scaling companies, and for good reason. He's a globally recognized CMO, GTM architect, and growth operator who's helped lead over 60 acquisitions and exits, supported an $880 million IPO, and scaled multiple companies through hypergrowth. He's built go-to-market systems and marketing engines that have driven massive revenue growth and operational scale across B2B, SaaS, consumer platforms, real estate, MarTech, and beyond. But Kurt doesn't just talk about marketing. He builds companies. He served in leadership roles at organizations ranging from early growth to over $1.4 billion in revenue, with experience across 6 continents. Kurt is also widely known for championing servant leadership. He teaches that great leaders don't control, they serve, by removing obstacles, coaching high performers, and building environments where people can thrive. His leadership philosophy: organizations can't grow beyond the capacity of their people, so leaders must build the people first. He's been featured by outlets like USA Today, TechCrunch, NBC, Wired, and Thrive Global, and he's taken the stage for over 100 keynote talks, including at many, many famous stages. Whether he's scaling go-to-market for a mid-market company, building a high-performing team, or helping founders and C-suites navigate inflection points, Kurt brings a practical, repeatable, and proven approach to sustainable growth. Welcome to the show, Kurt.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I look forward to our conversation. So I shared, a little bit in the intro, a lot of different things that you've done over the years, a lot of different work that you've done, the very impressive accolades. I always think of intros as kind of like Instagram photos. We frame things, to make sure that we show. And yet I always know that the journey that got us to those places tends to be a little bit bumpier, a little bit messier, a little bit less, we connect the dots in reverse. We don't connect them looking forward. So take us back in time and talk a little bit about your journey and what's brought you to the point where this is the message and this is the work that you're called to do.
Yeah, the actual journey in the story is usually much different than that kind of PR polished version. I think people that have followed my journey, that have known me personally, or that have worked for me especially, I mean, I've worked in so many different industries. I kind of like to look at the whole journey as like going back in time. I used to lead through kind of absolute authority. And so sometimes that was true hierarchical, like, hey, you report to me, do what I say. But other times it was also just trying to prove that I was the smartest person in the room. And so, like, one of the stories that I give back at this point is 20 years ago was like, I believed at that time, growing this really big company, that like if I walked into a room and you all worked for me and you were crying, that meant you were a bad employee. If everybody was crying, it meant that I dialed it up to 11 and I need to dial it back just a little bit more at that time period. And like that's the authority that I lived through. We were able to do some incredible things. I mean, I was an entrepreneur earlier in my life, but like that company specifically, we took from like 85 million year revenue to 1.44 billion, part of the small team for an $880 million IPO, like, and, multi-billion dollar acquisitions. But like it was great. I mean, that I was able to be at a place for over 10 years where it felt like a management consulting company, but wasn't, because we were at the hub of all of these major industries that were growing. And so I literally like we were in calls with Elon Musk starting Tesla because he was put navigation systems, and I'm going to start a car company, and nobody believed that was possible when like BMW was my meeting after that. But it's like then as part of all that growth, I had three major life impacts that happened like mid 2000 that completely changed how I looked at the world, how I re-examined like how I was leading. And what it really caused me was to start to look at both the people that were higher up in my organizations or those that were leading other companies. It caused me to really look at their personal lives because mine was atrocious at that time. And I didn't really realize it, but I didn't, especially didn't realize the term, but I was crafting a framework and a business case for servant leadership and how that's really the best way to grow companies with the least resources, what most people financially care about, and the least risk.
Right.
And so since then, I've been able to take what I learned operating at those enterprise Fortune level environments and build, I mean, at this point, almost 100 scalable companies that are growth stage, mid-market companies, and bring in that discipline structure that you see in much larger organizations, but people don't tend to figure it out early.
Mm-hmm. So when you think about, you mentioned servant leadership, but that's kind of, in a lot of circles, that's treated as kind of a buzzword, right? Oh, we believe in servant leadership here. And yet they'll say that, but then what are they actually doing? What does that mean in the real world? So when you think about that, what, from your point of view, how would you define servant leadership, or what does it look like in the real world?
Yeah, for me, I think people overcomplicate leadership, especially the term servant leadership. I think there's a lot of people that call themselves servant leaders, and to your point, they're just really a nice boss, but they really lead through authority. And so for me, all leadership really just comes down to two core things. It's either one, I'm leading by authority, which at the end of the day is I've hired you, you do what I say, how I say it, usually in the time frame that I said it, or you're fired. And that threat is always there, no matter how nice somebody is. Or what I think is servant leadership is to say, look, I'm not actually hiring, especially in a job environment, I'm not hiring you to do what I said. I've hired you to help me reach a business outcome. At which point then, yes, I strongly believe there's certain things you should be doing to accomplish that. But as a servant leader, I'm hiring you for that outcome, which shifts me from leading from authority instead to saying, after that, I want you to help me reach that business outcome. So I need to think about how I can serve you to better reach my business outcome or the business outcome the company wants. That may mean coaching you, it may mean difficult decisions, difficult discussions. It may mean it may mean turning my team loose and giving that to other people at the company. But it's me showing up to serve you to reach the business outcomes that I want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've often, talked about leaders sometimes as, our job isn't to be in the way, it's to get things out of the way. and yet all too often we kind of put ourselves in the way, if that makes sense. How have you seen that play out?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think a huge bit of that when I'm approaching things as a servant leader is, to your point, I need to be removing obstacles from the people on my team. In some cases, that may mean myself or it may mean other leaders. But the bigger thing I think is what you said is, I think what too many people forget, especially authoritative leaders, even the nice people, is that everybody that's working for you, or if you're applying this in your personal lives, we're all whole people. And so like, I don't have an employee on my team to only produce for me this week or this month. In most cases, I'm looking for the maximum efficiency I can get out of them to hit those outcomes over 6 months, a year, 3 years that they're working for me, which means that I'm acknowledging, and I think there's too many stumbling blocks in people, is that, hey, they're going to have things that come up in their life. They're going to have a birth that happens. They're going to have a spouse that goes into, a health crisis. They may be thrust into elder care. Like they may get cancer themselves. All of those things may drastically shift. Like it's personal, but they may drastically shift how efficient they are at work. But it's like, if I'm acknowledging that, then I'm acknowledging they're a whole person. Maybe they just kind of had that halt. They're hungry, they're angry, they're tired type of thing. But I'm acknowledging that I'm wanting to help coach them through and understand what's going on right now so that I can get that maximum efficiency long term. And as well for them, like they have a personal mission, which means that I'm acknowledging that like that personal mission may mean outgrowing my company, or it may mean, hey, like I'm here strictly for the healthcare. Like that's okay. But it's acknowledging that there's whole people behind them.
So one of the things I like to highlight on the show is, speaking of whole people, is the intersection between our faith journey, whatever that is for us, and our life journey, and how those transitions kind of feed back and forth. And you talked a little bit about your leadership past and how that has changed over time. But how has your faith journey intersected with the way you see the world?
In many different ways. A very brief bit of it about my faith journey is I was raised in a half Christian home. Like my mother was a believer, but she never talked about it. My father was not a believer. He came to Christ actually well after I had graduated college. We went to church, but we didn't talk about faith. So there's no apologetics or kind of defense of anything. We moved from Chicago to to North Alabama. And we started attending a church where they preached the gospel, but you didn't see it in people's actions, let's just say. And so I went to like college and stuff, and I knew God. I had no relationship whatsoever. I hadn't looked at the evidence for the Bible or Christ at that time. It's kind of like in my 30s, like, that's the longer story, but that I actually came to faith in Christ. And I kind of mentioned I had these three big life events that happened all at once. And that may have shifted me becoming a nice boss or a nice coworker, but it did not change my leadership style. So, which is where I really view my main journey in being effective at work. While my faith does align with the requirements of servant leadership and leading, I do not think that servant leadership that it's based on a specific religion or a faith. Mm-hmm. But my faith did open my eyes to starting to look at what's out there and that kind of binary approach of authoritative leadership versus servant leadership. And so, if anything, while it does support that, it probably does make me much better, though, on the followership side. I think so many people talk about leadership-wise, but it's like I have no problem doing the grunt work when need to be done, because sometimes somebody needs to bust the table, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And so, that's what you do with our faith. And so, if anything, it makes me easier at that, which probably does help other people choose to follow me more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, sometimes it can make us, what you were just talking about observing the whole person. Mm-hmm. It can open us to that idea that people are more than just the 9 to 5, more right. than just the time at work, that there are other components to their life, whatever those components may be. They may be faith, they may be family, they may be whatever, And I know for me, at least, whenever I went through kind of an epiphany and I was in a leadership role, the other thing it did is it opened me up on, quite frankly, people that I was blind to before. So the person that came in and emptied the trash,
right?
And before they were just kind of somebody that came in and emptied the trash. And afterwards it's like, oh, I should actually probably get to know this person a little bit, because I'm up here at 9 o'clock at night. They're showing up, maybe I should actually have a conversation and, and find out a little bit about them because they're doing something that's essential to the running of the company. And, it's not little anymore. You start to see the size of even the quote small things.
Right. Well, and to your point about seeing the whole person, because I was, well into adulthood before, and well into my career before I had a faith change, so many things became aware to me about the hidden assumptions I had, not just in my faith, but how I looked at world. And so it's like, it's not rare now. Like we built up a company that we sold to Oracle for 300 plus million dollars. I probably had 110, 120 people at the time. I bet I could have sat down at that point and made a list of at least 90, if not 100 of those people and said, here's what they believe from a faith perspective. And that they would have looked at it and said, yeah, that's right. And not because I was trying to sell my faith at any point, but I was curious about who they were. And I'm deeply believing now, and was developing it at that time of to be able to help you align with the company's mission and purpose, you need to know your own purpose and mission, which may mean that you like maybe that's a faith thing. Maybe it's writing checks to starving kids in Africa, or maybe trying to make as much money as possible. But if you haven't thought that through, there's no way I can align you with the company's mission. So I would ask questions, being curious. And it's awesome to hear people where it's like, we sold another company to a public company and I stayed there for a while. And I had a COO at the time and I asked him, like, why are you doing this? And he said, like, I just want to be happy. And so I asked him a question. I said, well, like temporally, like, do you want to be happy like this week, this month, the year, 10 years, or like over your life if you look back? And he kind of froze and he's like, I don't know. And he came back to me literally like a week later and then several times later. And he was like, I've never thought about my decisions impacting my happiness, which was his goal.
Right.
How like that would affect now versus later. Like he was devoutly committed to his wife, but like he had never thought about it. He's like, if I was just trying to be the most happy as possible, maybe the decisions that I would make in the short term don't match with that 10-year or 50-year viewpoint. And I was like, so what are you going to do with that? And he was like, I have no idea. And I was like, I'm hot. Like, can we just grab coffee periodically? Like, I love the fact that I asked the question trying to know you. And you were like, I don't know, but I want to.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and I think, let's go back to servant leadership and in a company, because you framed things earlier as, making people, helping them be the most effective, the most efficient. You talked about, good for the company, good for the people, all of that. Why do you see servant leadership versus authoritarian or authoritative leadership being better? And I'm putting better in air quotes because better can mean a lot of different things from a company's point of view. What is better about a company led that way?
From an outcomes perspective, I mean, everything from a company perspective should be approached, in my opinion, from a controlled risk perspective. There's nothing wrong with, startups that are basically betting on a lottery type of win. But at the end of the day, it's I put in $100 or $100,000 or $10 million, and what output are you wanting to get on the other side of that? And so when I look back, we had this massive growth. Like I said, we grew a company from 85 million a year in revenue to 1.44 billion. And I could sit down and write books about how many billions of dollars we lost because we thought we were right on things, or how, we lost these high performing leaders because they had a different personal mission. They wanted to go home with their family and we didn't see them as a whole person. And so I'm like, I lost truly capable people. I lost resilience in my team. I lost institutional knowledge. And I was, from a pure investment perspective, there were many things. Like I have a framework now about trying to identify what I'm personally wrong about right now in my business that I think I'm right about, both in the company as large and my current team. Well, teams that do not lead with servant leadership, they do not identify those things. So it will take you 2 years to figure out that things that perhaps the people in your team only have a gut feel for right now. Well, I'll get to there in 3 months or 6 months, because from a servant leadership perspective, I'm going to come with strong ideas held loosely, always being humble enough to say, I know there's at least 3 things I'm fundamentally wrong about right now that you'll discover in 2 years, and I'm going to discover in 3 to 6 months. So my iterations are going to be that much faster. So I'm going to be able to build companies faster with less money and less risk than people with a truly authoritative leadership.
Mm-hmm. When you talk about the leader themselves, a lot of leaders put in a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of day to day. They're working the long hours, burning the candle at both ends. And yet they're whole people too. They've got a home life, a lot of times a wife or kid or, all of the above or other things in their life. How does this approach help them balance that for themselves as well?
I love the question because for me, people that are truly high performing usually love what they're doing.
Mm,
It may be that they love the outcomes that they're getting, but they love things so much. Like, hey, you don't have to convince me to work versus watch Netflix because there's nothing going to be on Netflix that I get more dopamine out of than hitting some of those targets at work. And so I think most high performers are that way. And so for me, it really comes down to there's three things. And so if you want to be that high growth executive, but still be kind of present at home, and at the end of the day, for me, I like the term. I want somebody to look back and go, I feel like I have won at home and at work. And so, as opposed to looking back and go, it's great, I got a lot of money and I've gotten a lot of titles, but like my wife divorced me or my kids don't know me. So for me, the three things are pre-fighting. So that's being intentional about blocking your time. And so the examples that I give is like there were times with crunch periods, and no matter size the stage of the company, my wife and I will sit down and be like, I need more hours right now. So like for a long time, we had an agreement. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I could work as late as I wanted to. She may put the kids down to bed. She may even wake up in the morning and I'm still working. And so there was no concern whatsoever about that. But on Mondays and Wednesdays and Fridays, I would be home well before dinner to help with that. And so pre-fighting kind of, there's a ton of those decisions being intentional. The second thing for me is to be picky about who you work with. I mentioned purpose-driven people. Regardless of their purpose, if you don't know what their purpose is, their decisions are going to impact you, and you will not know how to have that pre-fight discussion. My CEO right now, Preston Guyton, he has a son in high school who's an all-star golfer. I assume will be pro at some point, but will be going to college. There's almost nothing that could happen at a work perspective where I would call Preston in the late afternoon because he's being a caddy for his son. So I'm choosing to work with somebody who knows their purpose, knows what they're trying to do. In that case, does have a shared faith, but it's like we know each other where we're available and where we're not. And then the third thing, and I think this is probably the hardest thing for anybody that's a high achieving person, is to get a group around them of close people that they might be friends, but they're probably not going to be friends. And for me, I always have like a faith-based group around of guys, but and like, are we friends? Well, we're friendly. And I think the one key of friendship there is like, I should always be willing to tell you something that you need to hear that would jeopardize our relationship because I care so much about you. Like that's the most important thing. And so having a group of people around you that hopefully are at some kind of similar stage in their career as you, not necessarily in the same industry, but same life stages, so that when you say, this is what I'm trying to accomplish, both at work and at home, they're able to ask questions and you can be completely transparent at them and not worry about like friendship or anything else. Because if you don't do that, like then you end up, whether husband or wife, trying to rely on your spouse for that. And in my experience, your spouse is never the best person to hold you accountable or ask those really hard questions that you need to be asked if you're truly a high growth executive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when somebody's hearing this and maybe they're thinking to themselves, okay, I'm getting it. I understand the idea here, but you know, at the end of the day, the buck stops with me, and I've got to get it done. And I've been telling people how to do it. And, everybody that's the way it is at our workplace. Maybe that's the culture, or maybe it's at home, that's the culture. That's the history. This is the way it's done. What are some of the things that they can look at to help them start shifting? Maybe they aren't even in a positional leadership position. Maybe they're, quote, in the cubicle,
Yep.
and yet they're a leader because people look to them. They've been there 20 years. And so they're their institutional knowledge bank. What are some of the things that they can do from a mindset perspective or from a behavior perspective to start putting shifts in place that, beyond just quitting and leaving and going somewhere else?
Yeah, great question. I mean, there's a long list I think you and I could both give of things they could do. For me, the biggest thing comes down to it's a mindset shift. And so I mentioned like what could I be wrong about? And so I have like three ways that I'm always doing that in my life. And so that I'm literally going through and that for people I mentor or that I coach, that I train them to do. And so the first is to to your point about yourself. Like literally when I brush my teeth every morning, I ask myself, like I take about 30 seconds. I ask myself, what could I be wrong about? Not what am I wrong about, but what could I be wrong about in my business right now that I think I'm right about? And it starts that kind of like humbleness of there is something out there. I just don't know what it is. And then I take another 30 seconds and I ask, what could I be wrong about in my family life? That could be with my wife some days. It could be with my kids. I've got a 4-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old son, like how I'm interacting with them. And so I start that, and that's kind of the internal work. And you don't have to like take a really long time, but like I said, just take like 30 seconds for each one of those. Then the next two things is, especially at work. So on the one-on-ones you have, whether you're in the cubicle and you're meeting with the boss, or when if you're the leader and then when you're working with people that you're that are underneath you, I add time at the end of it to let them answer that for me. What could I be missing in my role right now? What could I be missing in my job? And the key for that is you do not give feedback. The only thing you can respond to that is inquisitive questions that are truly trying to understand, and then thank them for their response. And so that does a bunch for you starting to identify what you may be wrong about. But especially if you're leading people, that starts to put it in their mind that you truly are open to this, and they'll start bringing you things that you never realized, but they start showing up differently too, because now you're the different boss. You're not the authoritative boss. And very similar to that is this is where I fail at the most, both doing it consistently and not asking questions. But you should ask your spouse and kids that. Like I literally ask my 6-year-old at times, like, "Hey, what's Daddy doing wrong right now?" And so sometimes I hear like, "You're a little too harsh." Like I may ask questions to understand that, but I'm not pushing back for it. It doesn't mean he's right, but it means, especially with your spouse, you're open to hearing those things. And like just doing those 3 different ways of trying to identify what could you be wrong. It's a mind shift change that fundamentally will change everything else that would be on your list.
Yeah, and some of it too, like you said, is it's not even are they right about it. If nothing else, I'm hearing their perception about
Right.
it, and perception to some extent is reality. you know, I mean, if they perceive that you're closed-minded and arrogant, well, from their point of view, you're closed-minded and arrogant,
Right.
period. No matter what you think of yourself or believe of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a big believer in having the company culture written, not as much especially not for the billboard that a lot of companies have it, that it doesn't match at all the internals. But I try telling people, I'm like, this is so you can hold me and other people accountable for it. And so one of those things is like strong opinions held loosely. Well, yeah, I've been very successful. I've also failed a lot of times. So those failures teach me a lot. And so I'm going to come with really strong opinions a lot of times. But am I, to your point, perception, is Kurt actually open to new opinions? Or if you disagree, am I actually taking the time to explain to you why I have this belief, to either bring you on board or to be proven wrong on something? Like those are things, yeah. Their perceptions do matter there.
Absolutely. So I've got a few questions that I like to ask all of my guests, but before I ask you those, is there anything else about what we've been talking about with servant leadership that you'd like to share with the listener?
Yeah, I think both for approaching servant leadership, but also just trying to be effective as yourself. For me, what we just touched on a little bit is I spend a huge bit of time with my wife where we're stewarding mine and hers, our time and our skills, the way that everybody should be, but most people don't steward their budget and their resources. So it's like we're literally sitting down saying, "Hey, based on our skills and our time, like where should we invest our time and skills, both in the shorter term, in like the 2 to 5 year time frame, and 5 years out?" And I try taking that approach at work. So I think from a leadership side, you should do that. And when you approach it, like it changes how you impact from a leadership perspective about stewarding things. When you say, no, let's be really clear. When I say about like a 2 to 5 year time period or 5 years out, imagine that where you're investing your skills or time today, you see zero return until that time frame. You were investing in your kids, you were investing in growth, you're in a nonprofit or your company, and there's no return. You may get leading indicators, but no returns for 5 years and 1 day. And so that's a huge bit, I think, of approaching things from a true leadership perspective, is thinking about stewarding those other pieces. And it's not just about money.
Absolutely. So speaking of stewardship, my brand is Inspired Stewardship, and I run things through that lens of stewardship. So when you hear the word stewardship, what does that word mean to you?
For me, it means that I'm a manager of, in the case that I gave, both the dollars I've been entrusted with, the dollars that I've earned or that God's let me earn, in the skills that I have and my time. And so as a good manager for that, my job is to provide as much return as possible for the person that actually belongs to. And so it does mean that there's often conflicting things. So if it's not just the money perspective, it means I have to struggle as the steward to say, look, my time is one thing, but is my time best spent digging ditches to help a nonprofit and do a Habitat for Humanity? Or is like, well, that's in contradictory to applying my skills and donating perhaps time with skills in a different way. So I really have to struggle with that to say, like, what is the right decision a lot of times. And so for me, it's being a manager, but struggling with usually competing priorities, at least if you're looking at those three categories, the way I define things.
So this is my favorite question that I like to ask everyone. Imagine for a moment that I invented this magic machine. And with this machine, I was able to take you from where you are today and transport you into the future, maybe 150, maybe 250 years. And with the power of this machine, you were able to look back and see your entire life, see all of the connections, all of the ripples, all of the impacts you've left. What impact do you hope you've had in the world?
I hope I'd see two things. One, that there's some record of seeing me continuing to improve. I mean, I fail at so many things today that I was still even working at 5 years ago. So I hope, like, if you could just look at Kurt's actual legacy there, you'd see Kurt was continuing to improve week after week, month after month. But more than that, especially over that time frame, I hope that I could see that I've multiplied myself and that those people have continued to multiply themselves. And so, like, I don't have to work anymore. One of the reasons that I'm working is because, like, yeah, it's great being on stage, giving a keynote. It's wonderful being an executive coach for the one or two people I do that with. But I know that, like, that may be a small step for somebody changing how they approach things. The real life impact comes from somebody by me working as a peer, working for them, or them working under me, where it's like those 8 to 10 people you're in close relationship with. And like, that's how multiplication happens. They see you make decisions day in and day out.
So what's on the roadmap? What's coming next as you continue on your journey?
I will continue to be an operating executive for high growth companies. I just say that I do get called for speaking opportunities. I got called and I was like, I literally asked, I said, why did you call me? They named off 2 or 3 people that, like, servant leadership, like they're the books on Amazon. And they're like, well, one, they're super expensive, but 2, like, they haven't led teams. They haven't been in the trenches for 30 or 40 years with people. And so I will continue to lead companies because I mentioned, I think that's the best way. First, I love building companies. I love people looking back just from a dopamine hit perspective. And they're like, I can't believe you all were able to do that or change an industry with such a small team. But I do believe that's the best way to multiply myself. Second from that, like, you're going to continue to find me on some big stages periodically, both sometimes at the hyper local level, but I both will take time doing that. And then I mentioned following. You will find me, especially for the next 5 years or so. My son is 6. We're in Trail Life USA. Since Boy Scouts has gone one direction, Trail Life's come up. And it's like, you'll find me not leading the troop. I'm in there as a grunt, helping along the side, doing communication and helping serve them.
So you can find out more about Kurt over at kurtuhlir.com. Of course, I'll have a link to that in the show notes as well, so you can find it there. Kurt, anything else you'd share with the listener?
I'd say if you have any questions on anything, I write a ton on my website, and leave a question, because seriously, I will either contact you or I will write an article just going into depth for it. So I love feedback from people.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you enjoyed this episode, please do us a favor. Go over to inspiredstewardship.com/iTunes rate, all one word, iTunes rate. It'll take you through how to leave a rating and review and how to make sure you're subscribed to the podcast so that you can get every episode as it comes out in your feed. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact the world.